In the heart of 1883, New York, Tom Baxter, a skilled poker player, finds himself tangled in a dangerous game of power and deception when he crosses paths with the ruthless businessman, Alfred Harrington. As the stakes rise and secrets unfold, Tom realizes that he's not just playing for money, but for control of the city itself. Betrayals, hidden alliances, and unexpected twists force Tom to confront the true cost of power. With every move, the game grows more deadly. But can Tom outsmart Alfred before it's too late? Watch as the battle for truth and survival escalates to its breaking point. New York City, 1883. The streets were bustling with energy, and the air was thick with ambition. The city had just come off the heels of the Gilded Age, a period marked by rapid industrialization and incredible wealth. But it wasn't all opulence. Beneath the gilded exterior, the darker side of the city was as real as ever, filled with those who'd do anything to survive. In a small pub tucked away in a corner of the East Village, men and women of all kinds gathered. They came for the cheap whiskey, the low-stakes poker games, and a chance to escape their everyday lives, even if only for a night. Among the regulars was a man named Tom Baxter. Tom wasn't a name that carried much weight outside these walls, but in this pub, in this moment, he was someone to be reckoned with. He had the kind of face that blended into the crowd, just another working-class man, strong jaw, tired eyes, and a quick smile when he needed it. Tom's reputation here wasn't built on brute force or intimidation. No, it was built on something more subtle, something that made him a master at poker, a quick mind and a knack for reading people. He could see their tells, sense their hesitations, and find their weaknesses. But tonight, something was different. The game felt off. Something in the air wasn't right. At the head of the table sat Alfred Harrington, a tall, well-dressed man in his late 40s. He had the look of someone who'd always been in control, someone used to getting what he wanted. His eyes locked with Tom's for a moment, a brief exchange of knowing looks. There was a history between them, unspoken, but clear. Alfred Harrington wasn't just a businessman in the city. He was a man who played by his own rules. And Tom wasn't entirely sure if those rules included fairness. Alfred had a reputation of his own. He was the kind of man who used his wealth to smooth over any trouble, who could bribe anyone to keep his secrets. His poker face was as flawless as the tailored suits he wore, but Tom knew better than to be fooled by the charm. The others at the table weren't as intimidating. There was Samuel Green, a small-time gambler with the nervous energy of a man who couldn't hold on to his money for long. He fidgeted in his seat, nervously shifting the stack of chips in front of him as if he were trying to hide them from someone, maybe even from himself. Then there was Henry Collins, an older man who had seen more poker games than he could probably count. He was the quiet type, always hanging back in the shadows, observing more than participating. But Tom had learned long ago that Henry was more dangerous than most. His silence made him unpredictable, and Tom knew that Henry had played in enough high-stakes games to hold his own with the best. Finally, there was Mary, a woman with fiery red hair and a laugh that seemed to fill the room no matter how quiet the conversation. She was a regular here, often playing alongside the men, holding her own in the games with a combination of charm and cunning. She was a known player, but not the kind of player who let her emotions get in the way. Mary didn't trust easily, but Tom had a feeling that she trusted him just a little more than the others. The game was simple. 5-card draw poker, the stakes modest for a pub game but higher than what Tom usually played for. He liked the smaller games. They were easier to control, more predictable. But tonight, with Alfred Harrington across from him, everything felt off. Alfred had that look in his eye, one that made Tom uneasy. As the cards were dealt, Tom studied the players. Samuel Green was already sweating, his hand twitching as he picked up his cards. He was nervous, but that wasn't unusual. Tom could already guess that Samuel had a bad hand. Henry Collins, on the other hand, seemed calm, his poker face as unreadable as ever. Mary sat back in her chair, a slight smile on her lips. Tom caught her eye for a second, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw a flicker of something, an understanding, maybe. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She was always hard to read, even for him. Then there was Alfred, always cool, always in control. He took his cards slowly, inspecting them with the kind of precision that came from years of practice. Tom knew Alfred's type. He had seen enough men like him in his life, men who used the game as a means of domination, who didn't mind taking risks if it meant winning big. The game began, and Tom's instincts kicked in. The cards flowed in the same rhythm as they always did, one round of betting, then another. Samuel made the first move, betting a small amount, clearly nervous about his hand. Henry followed suit. His bet small, but deliberate Mary, as always, raised the stakes a little, just enough to keep things interesting. But Alfred Harrington had barely moved. He studied his cards as though he were calculating something far beyond the game itself. Tom had seen this before. Alfred was never in a hurry. He was always thinking, always planning. Tom followed the flow of the game, placing his bets with careful thought. He had the upper hand. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way Alfred hadn't reacted to the first round of bets. Or maybe it was the way Henry kept glancing at the other players, as if he were looking for an opening. As the rounds went on, Tom's suspicion grew. The game was too smooth, too controlled. There was something missing in the way the others played. The tension in the room felt forced, not the natural pressure of a high-stakes game, but the kind of tension you get when someone is trying too hard to make it feel real. Then, in the third round, it happened. Alfred Harrington made a move. One that Tom wasn't expecting. Alfred raised the stakes, just enough to make the others hesitate. But Tom saw it clearly, and it sent a chill down his spine. Alfred wasn't just betting on his cards, he was betting on something else. Something that Tom couldn't quite put his finger on. But he was certain of one thing. Alfred was playing the players, not the cards. Tom's instincts were screaming at him. He wasn't just playing poker anymore. He was caught in a game of deception, and Alfred Harrington was the one holding all the cards. And just like that, Tom knew. It wasn't about winning. It was about something much bigger than the game. The stakes were higher than he'd realized. Tom had to decide, was he going to call out the bluff, or was he going to play Alfred's game and try to beat him at his own tricks? Because one thing was certain. Tonight, someone was going to be cheated, and Tom wasn't about to let it be him. Alfred Harrington's raise in the third round hung in the air as if the whole room held its breath. It was a classic move, a calculated way to gauge his opponents, but it wasn't just about the money tonight. Tom felt it deep in his gut. Something was off, something beyond the chips and the cards. Alfred wasn't just playing to win, he was playing to control the table, and Tom had to make a choice. Was he going to call his bluff, or let the game play out and risk losing more than just money? Mary caught Tom's eye again, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. He wasn't sure if she was on his side or if she was just enjoying the chaos of the game, but there was something in her expression that made Tom think she might know more than she let on. He'd always been able to read people. But Mary, she was a mystery, always walking the line between ally and adversary. Tom took a deep breath, pushed his chips forward, and called Alfred's raise. It was a bold move, one that could either secure his position at the table or get him swept away in Alfred's web of manipulation. But Tom wasn't the type to back down from a challenge. Not when there was this much on the line. As the next round unfolded, Tom's instincts told him that Alfred had a hand he wasn't showing. It wasn't just the way Alfred bet. It was the way he seemed to be watching everyone else, almost as if he knew what cards they were holding. Tom knew something wasn't right, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He was getting a sense of déjà vu, like he'd been in this situation before, but with different players. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to pull something shady in a poker game. But Alfred. He was different. He was clever. Too clever. When the final card was dealt, the tension in the room reached its peak. Everyone glanced at their hands, trying to figure out whether to fold or go all in. Alfred was the first to bet, his voice smooth and confident. "I think we're done here," Alfred said, leaning back in his chair. His eyes twinkled with that familiar, dangerous glint. "Unless anyone has the guts to go higher." Tom hesitated. He had a good hand. Not great, but good enough. If he folded now, he'd lose a sizable chunk of his stack. But something in Alfred's posture made Tom doubt the man's honesty. Something in the way he was playing, like he already knew the outcome. Then, Tom made the decision. He would raise just a little, to see if Alfred would bite. "I'm in for 20, Tom said, his voice steady. He kept his gaze fixed on Alfred, waiting for the reaction. He wasn't just playing the cards, he was playing the man. Alfred didn't flinch. In fact, he smiled. "Well, well," Alfred said, sliding his chips forward. "I didn't expect that from you, Baxter. But I suppose I'm in." The game continued, the bets climbing higher, each player trying to read the others, trying to outmaneuver them. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was building up, something that would shift the balance of power at the table. The stakes were no longer just about money. They were about respect, survival, and the hidden rules of the game that Alfred was so good at bending. The river card was revealed, and Tom felt a pang of hope. He had a flush. He was in a strong position, but it wasn't enough to let his guard down. Alfred looked at the river card with a slight frown before pushing all his chips to the center. It was the move of a man who had already decided the outcome. Tom knew then that he wasn't just playing against the cards, he was playing against Alfred's mind. "All in, huh?" Tom said, trying to hide the nervousness creeping into his voice. "You're confident, I'll give you that." Alfred's grin widened. "I'm more than confident, Baxter, I'm sure." Tom couldn't let it slide. His instincts screamed at him to do something, to make a move, to confront the situation. He wasn't a fool. He'd seen enough of Alfred's tricks to know that there was more going on than a simple poker hand, and he was going to find out exactly what that was. "Let's see your hand, Alfred," Tom said, his voice cool, but determined. "I'm not folding." Alfred raised an eyebrow. "You sure once I show you, there's no turning back?" Tom leaned forward. "I'm sure." There was a moment of silence as Alfred stared at him, a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or admiration. Then, slowly, he laid his cards on the table. "Full house," Alfred said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "King high." Tom's heart skipped a beat. A full house. It was a powerful hand. But then Tom realized something wasn't right. The cards Alfred had laid down, the king and the 10 of spades, looked too perfect, too arranged. It took a second, but it hit him. The cards were stacked. It wasn't just Alfred who was manipulating the game. There was something bigger at play here, and Tom had walked right into it. He felt a rush of frustration mixed with anger. He wasn't just being outplayed, he was being cheated. Without thinking, Tom stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He leaned across the table, his face inches from Alfred's. "You think you can get away with this?" he hissed. Alfred didn't flinch. He only smiled that infuriating, smug smile of his. "What are you going to do about it, Baxter? The game's over, and you've lost. You can either walk away now, or I'll make sure you regret ever stepping into this place." Tom's hands were clenched into fists, but he knew this wasn't the time to lash out. He had to think, and think fast, If Alfred had rigged the game this far, who else was in on it? He turned to look at the others at the table, his eyes narrowing. Samuel Green was sweating, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Henry Collins, as always, remained quiet, his gaze flicking nervously between the players. And Mary. She was watching the scene unfold with an unreadable expression, her fingers idly tapping the side of her glass. But something told Tom that she wasn't as innocent as she appeared. She might not have been part of the rigging, but she had to know more than she was letting on. Tom's mind raced. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. "Let's take this outside," Tom said, his voice steady now, his anger replaced with cold resolve. He didn't care about the game anymore. This had gone too far. Alfred looked amused, but didn't protest. He got up slowly, the other players following his lead, no one daring to make a move just yet. As they filed out into the street, Tom turned to Mary. "You knew about this, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low. Mary didn't answer right away. She simply glanced at him, her eyes flickering with something he couldn't quite place. Finally, she spoke. "Maybe I knew, but maybe I didn't care," she said, her voice soft but cutting. "You're playing a dangerous game, Tom. And you're about to lose more than just your money." Tom didn't have time to process her words before Alfred spoke up. "You've made your choice, Baxter," Alfred said, his voice cold. "Now you'll live with it." And just like that, Tom knew that the stakes had just been raised. He wasn't just playing for money anymore, he was playing for his freedom. As they stepped out into the cool night air, the atmosphere around them thickened, and the usual sounds of the busy city, carriages clattering, voices echoing down the street, seemed to fade into a tense silence. The group had gathered just outside the pub, the shadows from the gaslights casting long figures on the cobblestone streets. The chill in the air wasn't just from the evening, it was from the unspoken tension that crackled between them all. Tom stood, fists clenched, as Alfred approached him with a slow, deliberate pace. His confident stride barely slowed as he reached Tom's side, a subtle but distinct smile playing at the corner of his lips. "You've got guts, Baxter. I'll give you that," Alfred said, his voice smooth and almost patronizing. "But that won't be enough to save you now." The words sent a chill down Tom's spine, though he hid it well. He had no intention of backing down. Not now, not when everything was on the line. He had learned to read people's expressions long ago. But this was something different. Alfred's calm demeanor, the way he held himself, it all spoke of power, control, and a complete lack of remorse. Tom took a step forward, keeping his gaze locked on Alfred. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? Like you've already won," Tom said, his voice steady, yet there was an edge to it. "But you're wrong." Alfred's smile faltered just for a moment, his eyes flicking over Tom's shoulder to the others who had gathered around Samuel Green stood off to the side, his face pale and jittery, his eyes darting between Tom and Alfred Henry Collins. Kept his distance, silent as ever, though the tension in his posture told a different story. He was nervous, just waiting for things to erupt. Then there was Mary. She leaned against the brick wall, arms crossed, her face illuminated by the dim gaslight. Her expression was unreadable, but Tom couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching him carefully, almost as if she were waiting for him to make a move. But what kind of move? Was she part of this scheme? Or was she simply caught in the middle of a dangerous game she couldn't control? "You're out of your depth, Baxter," Alfred continued, a faint sneer playing at his lips. "You've been playing with the wrong people, and now you're going to pay for it." There was a moment of silence, as if everyone were holding their breath, waiting for the storm to hit. Tom knew Alfred was playing a dangerous game, but he also knew this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, control, and something far darker that had been brewing under the surface. Tom had come here to play poker, to win some money, and prove a point. But now, standing in the street with the weight of Alfred's cold stare on him, He realized that this wasn't just a simple card game, it was a trap designed to ensnare him. Alfred hadn't just been manipulating the cards, he had been manipulating the players all along. But what was the end game? What did Alfred want from all of this? "I've been playing a lot of games in my life," Tom said, his voice low but firm. "And I've learned one thing above all else. When you make a move, you better be ready to follow through. So go ahead, make your move, Alfred." There was a shift in Alfred's demeanor, a brief flicker of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't expected Tom to stand his ground, and for a split second, it seemed to throw him off. But then that ever-present smirk returned, and Alfred's eyes gleamed with cold calculation. "You think this is a game?" Alfred chuckled darkly. "Let me show you just how real this can get." Without warning, Alfred reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, thin envelope, sliding it across the cobblestone toward Tom. The envelope was unmarked, but Tom's instincts screamed at him. This wasn't just a card. It was a message, a warning. Tom stared at the envelope for a long moment, feeling the weight of it in the air. He didn't touch it right away, instead looking up at Alfred, who watched him carefully, the amusement gone from his face. "Open it," Alfred said, his voice sharp now, no longer the playful tone it had been moments before. Tom bent down, his fingers brushing the envelope, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this was it, the moment everything changed. He carefully opened it and pulled out the contents. A slip of paper with a single line of writing. It was a threat, an ultimatum. The message was clear. Stop digging into Alfred's business, or the consequences will be dire. Tom's blood ran cold. He had been warned before, in less obvious ways. But this was personal. It wasn't just about the game. It was about everything Alfred had been hiding. Tom had stumbled into something much bigger than he had realized, and now he was stuck in the middle of it. Tom's eyes narrowed. Alfred had underestimated him. He wasn't going to back down now. He folded the paper back into the envelope, returning his gaze to Alfred. "This is your game, isn't it?" Tom said, his voice steady but laced with a hint of anger. "You don't want me at your table because I can see right through your lies. But here's the thing, Alfred. You're not as untouchable as you think, and you're about to find that out." Alfred's eyes darkened, the playful glint gone completely. He took a step forward, his hand brushing against the handle of the cane he always carried, a symbol of his power. "You're not the first man to threaten me, Baxter," Alfred said, his voice a low growl. "But you will be the last." Before Tom could react, Alfred motioned to Samuel, who jumped into action with surprising speed. The scrawny gambler pulled out a knife from his jacket, the glint of steel catching in the moonlight. "Samuel, no," Tom warned, but it was too late. Samuel lunged, aiming for Tom's side, but Tom sidestepped just in time, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't ready to fight, but he wasn't going to let himself be caught off guard. "Stay back," Tom shouted. But Samuel wasn't listening. He came at him again, more aggressively this time, trying to get in close to land a hit. Henry Collins, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the group, finally stepped forward. His hand was steady as he pulled out his own knife, not aimed at anyone in particular, but ready to defend himself if needed. The tension in the air was suffocating. It was a standoff, the cold street lit by gaslight flickering above them. Tom, now fully alert, knew this was the moment everything could change. One wrong move, and the situation would escalate into violence. But there was one thing Tom had learned over the years of working in the shadows of the city. When the stakes were high, the real battle wasn't about the weapons in your hands. It was about the leverage you held over others. Alfred's game wasn't just about power. It was about control. Tom knew he had to turn the tables, and he had to do it now. He wasn't just going to play Alfred's game. He was going to outsmart him. "Mary!" Tom called out, his voice cutting through the tension. "Get them to stand down now." Mary, who had been watching the scene unfold, finally uncrossed her arms. She stepped forward, her voice calm and measured as she addressed Alfred's men. "Stop," she said softly, but the authority in her voice was undeniable. "We're not doing this here. Not tonight." For a moment, it seemed like no one would move, the silence stretching between them. And then, slowly, Samuel lowered his knife, followed by Henry, his hands shaking but obeying. Alfred stood there, his expression unreadable. But the game had changed. The power dynamic had shifted. Tom didn't take his eyes off Alfred. "I'm done being your pawn," he said. "Whatever your game is, it's over. I'm not walking away and I'm not backing down." Alfred didn't answer right away. His eyes lingered on Tom for a long moment, weighing the situation. Finally, he turned, his voice cold. "We'll see about that, Baxter," he said, before turning to leave. "But remember this, no one crosses me without paying the price." As the group dispersed, the tension still hung thick in the air. But for the first time that night, Tom felt a glimmer of hope. The game wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. As Alfred and his men retreated into the night, leaving Tom standing in the cold, the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Tom could feel the pulse of the city surrounding him, the distant hum of carriages, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the game. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. Tom's mind raced as he looked around at the group that had been dragged into Alfred's web. Samuel Green, shaking and disoriented, was standing against the wall, still clutching his knife like it was a lifeline. Henry Collins stood a few steps away, his expression unreadable, but Tom could see the beads of sweat on his brow. They were all rattled, but none of them could afford to show it. This wasn't over yet. Tom turned to Mary, his eyes searching hers. "What the hell just happened?" Mary's eyes were sharp, calculating, but her lips curled into a wry smile. "Alfred's good at this, you know. He doesn't leave a trace. He sets things up, then sits back while everyone else does the dirty work. But he doesn't know who he's dealing with this time." Tom didn't return her smile. "So you knew? You knew what he was up to the whole time?" Mary hesitated, the smile slipping from her face. "Not everything. But I knew enough. I wouldn't have gotten involved if I didn't think you had a chance." A chance. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Tom's gut twisted. He had been played. Yes. But so had everyone else. And now, with Alfred pushing all the right buttons, there was no turning back. "I don't need a chance," Tom muttered, his fists clenched at his sides. "I need answers, and I'm going to get them, one way or another." The wind picked up, howling through the narrow alleyway, as if to remind them all that the city was far from forgiving. Mary stepped forward, her voice steady. "You want answers? Then you'll have to play Alfred's game. You can't just charge in and expect him to fold. You have to outsmart him." Tom nodded, his mind already running through the possibilities. But Mary was right. Charging in blindly had never been his style. He needed to think, to plan. This wasn't just a poker game anymore. It was war, and every move he made now would determine who walked away standing. But as the group began to disperse, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that the real game was only just beginning. Alfred had already played his first card and he was about to play his own. The next few days felt like a blur for Tom. He spent most of his time observing, waiting for the right moment to strike. Alfred had gone silent, and Tom could sense that the man was laying low, recalibrating his plans. But Tom didn't have the luxury of waiting. The stakes had risen, and he was running out of time. He met with Samuel once, in a dark corner of a small tavern, away from the prying eyes of the city. Samuel was still jittery, still unsure of where he stood in all this. But one thing was clear. Alfred's manipulation had made him paranoid. "I don't trust him," Samuel muttered, his eyes darting around the room. "I don't trust anyone anymore. Not after what happened." Tom understood that fear all too well. "You're not alone in this, Samuel," Tom said, his voice low and firm. "We all have our part to play. But if we're going to make it through this, we need to stick together. You hear me?" Samuel nodded, but Tom could see the doubt in his eyes. Samuel didn't want to get caught in the middle of Alfred's game any more than Tom did. But fear had a way of paralyzing people, and Samuel was no exception. Tom clapped him on the shoulder, trying to reassure him. "We'll get through this. But we have to be smart. Alfred's not going to make it easy, and he's always 2 steps ahead. We can't afford to make any mistakes." As the days passed, Tom grew more determined. He wasn't just playing for money anymore. He was playing for control, for answers, and most of all, for redemption. This wasn't about walking away from Alfred's game. This was about taking it over, about taking back the power Alfred had stolen from them. One evening, Tom decided to pay Alfred a visit. He didn't announce himself. He didn't send a letter. He simply showed up, walking past the guards, slipping into the back door of Alfred's office like he belonged there. The city had 1,000 ways of hiding secrets, but Tom knew how to find the cracks in the walls. Alfred's office was dimly lit, the shadows heavy with the weight of secrets. Tom had been in enough of these places to recognize the signs. The walls were lined with expensive bookshelves, leather-bound volumes that told the story of a man who had always been more than just a businessman. There were no personal touches here, no family photos, no personal mementos, just cold, calculated wealth. Alfred was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, his back to the door. He didn't even look up when Tom entered. "I've been waiting for you," Alfred said, his voice as calm as ever. "I knew you wouldn't just walk away. Not after what happened. You're too stubborn for that." Tom stepped forward, his boots silent on the plush carpet. "You've been playing me from the start, Alfred. You think I don't know that?" Alfred chuckled, the sound of it grating on Tom's nerves. "You're not the first man to try and outsmart me, Baxter, and you won't be the last. But you're running out of time." Tom's jaw tightened. "You think you have all the time in the world, don't you? But I'm not walking away anymore, Alfred. I've got you right where I want you." For a moment, the two men simply stared at each other across the desk. Alfred's eyes gleamed with something darker, something colder than Tom had ever seen before. And in that instant, Tom realized just how dangerous Alfred truly was. "You think you're in control?" Alfred said, standing up slowly, his voice turning icy. "You've made a mistake, Baxter. You've crossed a line you can't come back from." Tom stood his ground. "No. You're the one who's made the mistake, Alfred. You've underestimated me." And then, in one swift motion, Tom lunged. His hand shot forward, grabbing Alfred by the collar, slamming him back into the desk. The papers scattered, the ink bottles tipping over, but Tom didn't care about the mess. This was it. "I'm done playing your game," Tom growled. "I want answers, and I'm going to get them, one way or another." Alfred's face was twisted with rage, but for the first time, Tom saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into," Alfred spat. "You have no idea the forces you're meddling with. You think you can just walk in here and take control. You're nothing but a pawn." Tom's grip tightened, and for a moment he considered ending it right there. But then, something inside him snapped. He wasn't going to kill Alfred. Not yet. He needed him alive, at least long enough to get the truth out of him. "You're wrong," Tom said, his voice cold and steady. "I'm not a pawn, and I'm not going anywhere until you tell me everything." The next few hours were a blur of confrontation and revelations. Alfred, cornered, started to unravel. His carefully crafted facade began to crack, revealing a network of lies and manipulation that stretched far beyond the poker tables and the games they'd played. But even as the truth started to surface, Tom knew the most dangerous part of this story was still ahead. Alfred was powerful, but Tom had learned how to fight back. And now, with everything on the line, the final move would be his. Tom stood in Alfred's office, his hand still gripping the collar of the man who had manipulated him, played him for a fool, and used everyone around him as mere pawns in a game he controlled. The air between them was thick with tension, and Tom could feel the sweat on his brow, his heart pounding in his chest. He had Alfred where he wanted him, cornered, vulnerable, but that didn't mean he had won. "You've made a mistake, Baxter," Alfred growled, his voice strained with rage, though his eyes darted nervously, no longer the confident predator he had been just moments ago. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Tom's grip tightened, his voice low and forceful. "I think I do. You've been running the show, pulling the strings from behind the curtain. But now the curtain's been pulled back." For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence in the room was deafening. The weight of the situation seemed to settle around them, and Tom realized with a sickening clarity that this was more than just a battle over money or power. It was a battle for control, for truth, for everything that had been kept hidden in the shadows. "You think you've got all the answers, don't you?" Alfred said, a sneer curling his lip. "But you're wrong, Tom. The truth? It's more complicated than you think. You don't know who you're really dealing with." Tom pulled him closer, their faces mere inches apart. "Then tell me, Alfred. Tell me who you really are." The cold smile returned to Alfred's face, though this time it seemed hollow, like it was an act he was forcing himself to put on. He let out a harsh laugh, his eyes narrowing with a mix of amusement and contempt. "You think I'm just some businessman running a few crooked deals? No, Baxter. I'm a man who controls the game. All of it. Every move you make, every person you trust, every choice you think you have, it's all mine. You're not the first man to try and take me down, and you won't be the last." Tom's grip on Alfred loosened slightly, a flicker of doubt creeping into his mind. He'd always known Alfred was dangerous, but the depth of his reach, his ability to control everything around him, was far more than Tom had ever realized. But that only made Tom more determined he wasn't going to back down now. Not after everything he'd been through, not after the way Alfred had manipulated every player at the table. "You're wrong about one thing," Tom said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his chest. "I'm not going anywhere, not until you tell me everything." Alfred took a deep breath, the fight draining from his posture, and for the first time, Tom saw a flicker of something else, a crack in the veneer of the man who had ruled everything around him. The fear that had briefly flashed across Alfred's face when Tom had cornered him was now replaced by something darker, more calculating. "You think you can just take the throne, don't you?" Alfred said quietly. "Well, here's the thing, Baxter. You're not the first person I've broken. You won't be the last." Tom narrowed his eyes, sensing that Alfred was trying to push him further, to get him to make a rash move, to give him an opening. But Tom wasn't about to let that happen. "I've had enough of your games, Alfred," Tom said, his voice cold. "This ends now." Suddenly there was a sharp knock on the door. Both men turned. The moment of confrontation interrupted Tom's grip on Alfred's collar, tightened instinctively as he shot a quick glance at the door, a flash of suspicion crossing his face. Who could it be? More of Alfred's men? Or was someone else coming to play their part in the twisted game that had been unfolding? Alfred's face twisted with frustration, but he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the door. "Let them in," he muttered, his voice laced with an edge of authority that Tom knew wasn't easily shaken. The door swung open, and in stepped none other than Mary. Her face was calm, but there was something in her eyes, a glint of determination that Tom hadn't seen before. She looked between Tom and Alfred, and then her gaze shifted to the papers scattered across Alfred's desk. "Alfred," she said, her voice smooth but firm, "I think it's time we have a little chat." Tom's heart skipped a beat. What was she doing here? Had she been playing both sides this whole time? Was she part of Alfred's plan after all? Mary took a step forward, her eyes locked on Alfred's. Then she turned toward Tom. There was a flicker of something like regret in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. She wasn't here to help Alfred. At least, that was what Tom hoped. Alfred stood up straight, his posture stiffening. "This isn't your business, Mary," he said, his voice clipped. "You're stepping into something you don't understand." She ignored him, her gaze fixed on Tom. "Actually, it is my business. You're not the only one who's been playing a long game here, Alfred." Tom's blood ran cold. What was she talking about? Had she been involved in this from the beginning? Mary took another step forward, her heels clicking against the floor. She finally spoke, her tone sharp and clear. "Tom, I didn't want you to get caught up in this, but it's too late for that now." Tom couldn't contain the surge of anger that shot through him. "What the hell is going on, Mary? Are you working with him? Is this all a lie?" Mary looked at him, a flicker of sadness crossing her features, but her resolve didn't waver. "I'm not working for him, Tom, but I've been watching both of you." Alfred looked back and forth between the two, his expression a mix of confusion and frustration. "You've been playing both sides, Mary. What the hell is this?" "I'm playing my side, Alfred," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm done playing yours." Tom took a step back, his mind racing. So Mary wasn't working for Alfred, but she wasn't innocent either. She had known about the game from the start. She had seen Tom as a pawn, just like the rest of them. But something had changed. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Tom asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why wait until now?" Mary's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "I wanted to, Tom. I really did. But it's complicated. You wouldn't understand." "And now?" Tom asked, his voice sharp. "Now it's all just going to fall into place, is that it?" Mary's eyes flashed, her tone biting. "You think I didn't have a plan, Tom? You think I didn't know what I was doing? You think I'm just some fool who got tangled up in Alfred's mess? I'm not, but you're running out of time, and so is he." Alfred's anger flared, and for a moment, Tom thought the man might snap, but he held back, seething instead. "Enough of this," he spat. "If you two think you can outsmart me, you're sadly mistaken." Tom's mind was spinning, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place, but just as quickly, they slipped out of his grasp again. He needed to make a move. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. There was no more room for hesitation. This was the moment everything would change. Tom turned toward Alfred, the final confrontation nearing. "You've played your hand, Alfred," he said. "Now it's my turn. Reminder, if you're enjoying this ride, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Drop your thoughts in the comments. How do you think this is going to end for Tom and Alfred? Stay tuned for more." Tom's gaze locked onto Alfred, every muscle in his body coiled with tension. The moment of truth was closing in. Alfred, standing across from him, looked both infuriated and calculating, as though he was deciding just how far he was willing to push things. But Tom wasn't about to let this drag on any longer. There was no room for more games. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Alfred," Tom said, his voice low, unwavering. "But I'm done being your pawn." Alfred's eyes flashed with the kind of venom that only came from someone who had always been in control. His fingers drummed on the edge of the desk, his mind working behind those cold eyes. He knew that Tom wasn't bluffing. The momentary hesitation that flickered across Alfred's face betrayed just how much he realized that his carefully laid plans might be slipping away. You're walking a very fine line, Baxter, Alfred growled, his hand tightening around the cane in his grasp, his knuckles whitening. You have no idea what you're dealing with. You think this is all about a poker game. This is far bigger than that. The words hit Tom like a slap. What do you mean? He asked, voice steady but tinged with disbelief. Alfred straightened, his usual calm composure cracking for the first time. You think I control the game in this city? No, I control everything, the people, the power, the wealth. It all flows through me. But you, he pointed at Tom, his anger rising. You've somehow managed to get in the way. Tom took a breath, processing Alfred's words, the weight of the moment sinking in. He had known that Alfred was a dangerous man, but the scope of his manipulation, the reach he had, it was beyond what Tom had imagined. This wasn't just a business deal or a rivalry. It was a power struggle, one that Tom had unknowingly become a part of. I'm not backing down, Tom said, his voice rising slightly, the realization hitting him. If I have to burn this whole place down to get the truth, I will. There was a brief silence. Tom and Alfred stared each other down, the air thick with the unspoken understanding that this was the point of no return. Everything had led to this moment. The quiet manipulations, the silent threats, and the cold deception had finally come to a head. But just as the tension reached its peak, the door slammed open behind them, breaking the stalemate. The room went silent as a figure appeared in the doorway, one that Tom had never expected to see. It was Mary. Her entrance was sudden, and her presence had an immediate effect on the room. Tom's heart skipped a beat, his instinct screaming that something was wrong. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable, but there was a coldness in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Mary, Tom said, his voice a mix of surprise and suspicion. What the hell are you doing here? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped into the room, her gaze flicking between Tom and Alfred. It was clear from the tension in her shoulders that she had something to say, but Tom wasn't sure he was ready to hear it. Alfred, on the other hand, looked both surprised and amused. Ah, Mary, he said with a cold smile. The woman of the hour. Have you come to finish this? Or are you just here to watch the inevitable happen? Mary didn't flinch. She looked Alfred dead in the eyes, her voice calm, but with an edge that sent a shiver down Tom's spine. I didn't come here to finish anything, Alfred. I came to stop it. Tom's brow furrowed as he exchanged a confused glance with Alfred. Stop it? He asked, his voice rising. What are you talking about, Mary? Mary glanced at Tom, her gaze softening ever so slightly, but the determination in her eyes never wavered. I'm not working for Alfred, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I never was, but I've been playing a part in this, more than I ever wanted to, and I've been waiting for you to figure it out. Tom's mind was racing now, the puzzle pieces shifting into place. She hadn't been working with Alfred, not directly, but she had been involved somehow. She had been playing her own game, one that had aligned with Alfred's. But why? Why had she been so secretive? Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Tom asked, frustration edging into his voice. You could have stopped this from the beginning. Mary's eyes darkened, and she stepped closer to Tom, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I couldn't. You weren't ready to hear it, Tom. You wanted to fight the game by your own rules. But this game, it's bigger than both of us, bigger than anything either of us could control. Alfred scoffed, his irritation growing. You two think you can just make up your own rules now. The game's already been played, and you're both too late to change it. Mary ignored him and focused entirely on Tom. I did what I had to do, Tom. I had to keep Alfred off balance, but I never wanted you to be a part of his plan. You were always meant to be a pawn, just like the rest of us. But I've been trying to protect you. trying to protect your soul, if nothing else. Tom's mind spun with her words. Was she being truthful, or had she been manipulating him too, just like Alfred? He turned to Alfred, his eyes narrowing. What is she talking about, Alfred? You never told me everything, did you? Alfred, clearly growing agitated, slammed his fist onto the desk. I don't owe you an explanation, Baxter. You were always too naive to see the bigger picture you're in over your head now, and it's too late to stop it. Tom looked back at Mary, who was now standing directly in front of him. Her expression softened slightly, but the weight of the situation still hung heavy in the air. He could see the remorse in her eyes, the guilt of the decisions she had made. But he could also see something else. The resolve to fight for something more than just survival. Tell me everything, Mary, Tom said, his voice rough. I need to know what I've gotten myself into. Mary exhaled slowly, her eyes glancing briefly at Alfred before she began to speak. Her words weighed down with the gravity of the moment. Alfred's network isn't just about money or power, she explained, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. It's about control, about manipulation. He's built a system that runs on fear, on taking the most vulnerable people and making them his instruments. But that wasn't always the plan. It started with something smaller, just a game of power. But then it grew. And as it grew, he started pulling in more people. People like you, Tom. Tom's stomach twisted. He had been nothing more than a pawn, a tool in Alfred's grand scheme. His life, his fight, it had all been part of a much larger plot. Alfred controls everything. The city's economy, its politics, even the law. He's untouchable. And when he gets to a certain point, there's no going back. I tried to keep you out of this, Tom. I tried to protect you from the fallout. But now... Her voice trailed off as the weight of the situation hit her. Tom's hands clenched into fists. Now it's too late, he muttered, realization dawning on him. Alfred wasn't just some businessman. He was a puppet master, and they had all been caught in his strings. He turned to Alfred, fury in his eyes. This ends now. Alfred laughed, a harsh, cold sound that sent a chill through the room. It's already over, Baxter. You've lost. Reminder. If you've enjoyed the ride so far, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more intense moments ahead. Leave your thoughts in the comments. What do you think will happen next? Stay tuned for the thrilling continuation of this saga. The tension in Alfred's office hung like a thick cloud, stifling every breath, every movement. Tom stood firm, his resolve solidifying with each passing second. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in, as everything that had been built by Alfred, piece by careful piece, seemed to collapse before him. Mary's words echoed in his ears, and with each revelation, a new fire ignited inside him. He had been manipulated, controlled, and used, but he wouldn't let Alfred walk away this time. You think it's over, Tom said, his voice hard and steady. But it's not. Alfred's smirk faltered for a moment, and in that split second, Tom saw the cracks in the man's carefully constructed facade. Alfred had always been in control, always the one pulling the strings, but now it was Tom who had the upper hand. The game was no longer about cards or coins. It was about power, truth, and taking back what had been stolen. Is that so? Alfred sneered, his voice laced with bitter amusement. You still think you can change things? You've been a part of this all along, Tom. The only thing left for you is to walk away, just like everyone else who ever tried to stand up to me. Tom stepped forward, his eyes locked on Alfred's, not wavering. Not this time. This time it ends. Mary, who had been standing silently off to the side, stepped into the center of the room. Her face was no longer that of the secretive woman Tom had met weeks ago. Now, she was resolute, determined. He's right, she said, her voice calm but filled with an undeniable strength. It ends now. Alfred turned to face her, the sneer on his lips returning. You think you can change anything now? You're nothing but a pawn in my game, Mary. But she didn't flinch. I'm not your pawn anymore, Alfred. I never was. Tom watched the exchange. The reality of their situation settling in Alfred was no longer the untouchable man he had once been. The power he had wielded so effortlessly for years was beginning to slip from his grasp. The city, his city, had seen enough of his games. Now, it was time for change. Where does that leave you? Alfred hissed, his voice dripping with venom. You think you can just tear everything down and walk away with your hands clean? You think this city will let you? Tom squared his shoulders, his gaze unwavering. We don't need to walk away. We just need to take back control. With a sudden movement, Tom reached for the papers on Alfred's desk. The same documents that had been the foundation of all Alfred's manipulation, the blueprint of his empire. He slammed them down on the desk with a loud thud. This is it, Alfred, Tom said, his voice steady, his anger controlled. Your empire, all of it built on lies, deception, and fear. You can keep playing your game, but it's over now. It's done. For the first time in a long while, Alfred's expression faltered. His eyes darted between Tom and Mary, his mouth opening and closing, struggling to find words that could regain control. The silence in the room stretched, heavy with the weight of everything Tom had just said. But there was nothing Alfred could say now. The truth had been exposed. The game had ended. Get out, Alfred finally spat, his face contorted with rage. Get out of my office and stay out of my life. Tom didn't move. He stood there, looking at the man who had caused so much damage, so much chaos. Alfred was finished. His reign was over. That's not how it works, Alfred, Tom said, his voice softening just enough to deliver the final blow. You don't get to call the shots anymore, it's over. You'll face the consequences for everything you've done. Alfred's glare was pure hatred, but there was no fight left in him. The facade had shattered, and he knew it. Without another word, he turned away, storming out of the room, leaving the papers and the remnants of his empire behind. The room was silent for a long moment, the tension finally breaking as Tom exhaled deeply, a weight lifting from his chest. He had won, but there was still much to be done. Mary approached Tom slowly, her steps measured but resolute. She gave him a long look, her expression softening, as though everything she had said, everything they had gone through together, was now reaching its final conclusion. You did it, she said quietly, her voice carrying a quiet admiration. You really did it. Tom nodded, the words sinking in. He had done it, yes, but he couldn't help but wonder about the price of victory. The journey had changed him. It had forced him to confront his own flaws, his weaknesses, and to realize just how far he was willing to go for the truth. What happens now? Tom asked, his voice almost a whisper. Mary took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the window. Now, we rebuild the city isn't going to change overnight, but with Alfred gone, it's a start. People like him don't just walk away, they're held accountable, and I think we're both done playing games. Tom looked at her, his eyes searching for any sign of doubt. But all he saw was the same determination that had kept her going through everything she had been a part of this world, but now she was ready to leave it behind, and so was he. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Alfred's network collapsed almost immediately, his allies scattering as the truth about his manipulations came to light. The city was in a state of shock at first, unsure of what to do without the invisible hand of Alfred pulling the strings. But soon, a new order began to take shape. A new system, one built on transparency, honesty, and the people who had been overlooked for far too long, started to rise from the ashes. Tom, though, wasn't interested in the political games anymore. He had learned that some battles weren't worth fighting, that sometimes the best way to win was to step back and let others do the work. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he had come out of this changed. He had fought, he had won, but the cost had been higher than he ever imagined. As for Mary, she remained by his side. The connection they shared was undeniable, though neither of them rushed to label it. There was an unspoken understanding between them. They had been through hell together, and they had survived. The future was still uncertain, but together, they felt ready to face whatever came next. The final scene of the story takes place on a quiet evening. Tom stands on a rooftop, overlooking the city he fought to change. The skyline is bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, a symbol of the new beginnings taking root beneath it. The world felt different now. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, Tom felt hopeful. Mary joins him, standing beside him in the silence. They look out at the city together, the weight of everything they've been through settling between them. Neither speaks for a long while, but their presence speaks volumes. Finally, Tom breaks the silence. "It's over," he says, his voice soft. "Yeah," Mary replies, her tone reflective. "But this is just the beginning." Tom smiles slightly, his eyes still on the horizon. "The beginning of what?" "Of rebuilding," she says simply. "Of fixing what was broken." As they stand together, looking out at the city they had both fought to change, Tom knew one thing for sure. No matter what came next, he had a chance now, a real chance to make a difference. And with Mary by his side, the road ahead didn't seem so uncertain. Reminder: if you've enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling tales. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What did you think of Tom's journey? Stay tuned for the next adventure.